You're listening to Dakota Spotlight Podcast, a production of Forum Communications. My name is James Woolner. It's been a while since I released an episode. We ran into some delays due to illnesses and other factors. It's a new day, though, a new month, and a new year. And finally, this new episode. If you've listened to episode 1 of Chasing Billy, perhaps you'll recall that I interviewed the sheriff of Clay County, Minnesota, Mark Empting. When I asked him what it would take to get Billy's case solved, he had this to say.
As far as what it takes to get it solved, I think it's going to take somebody that's got some time to be able to actually dive into the investigation now, familiarizing themselves with all points of the investigation. I did just recently hire an individual. He's going to be working part-time for us, but he retired from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. He had 23 years working with them, most recently in their homicide division. And that's what his job is going to be here now, is to look at two of our cold cases that we have and see if he can maybe bring some closure to the families.
May I ask you if one of those two cases is the William Wolf case?
It is, yep. One of the cases he will be looking at is the William Wolf case.
The man that Sheriff Empting hired to look into Billy's murder is named Dan Baumann. In this episode, we're going to meet him and talk about Billy's case. Welcome back to Season 4, Chasing Billy, A Pursuit for Justice.
I caught it in my hands today. I finally made a tricky French connection. You winked and gave me your okay. I'll take you on a trip beside the ocean and drop the top of Chesapeake Bay. Ain't nothing like the sky to dose a potion. The moon will send you on your way. Moonlight feels right. Moonlight feels right.
I started out by asking Mr. Baumann a little bit about his background.
What initially got me into law enforcement is an association with a sheriff from Cottonwood County, Minnesota, Glenn Ward. Glenn was respectful and well respected throughout the community, and I tried to emulate him throughout my entire career.
Is he still around?
No, he passed on.
Dan started his law enforcement career as a police officer in Milner, North Dakota in 1984. In 1986, he was hired by the Richland County, North Dakota Sheriff's Department.
Then in 1989, I was hired by the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation to work narcotic cases.
In 1998, Dan was hired by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
And then in 2003, I was assigned to homicide investigations.
I asked Dan which high-profile cases he's worked on.
Well, early on in my career with the BCA, I was assigned to assist, and I stress the assist, with the Katie Poyer abduction, Julie Holmquist abduction, and Kelly Jo Larson murder throughout the state of Minnesota. Those are pretty high-profile investigations. I was involved with the Cheryl Tendelin homicide with the BCI back in, I believe it was 1996. Since 2003, I've pretty much been involved in any of the homicide investigations in west central Minnesota.
I asked Dan Baumann if there was any particular difference between working for the North Dakota BCI, or Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and the Minnesota BCA, or Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
The primary difference is obviously Minnesota, with the population, has a greater number of violent crimes, and with that, there's more individuals assigned specifically to homicide investigations.
How about, Dan, could you tell us about, from your perspective, how looking at a cold case is different from what you've done before?
Well, with your standard homicide, if you will, you're reactive in that investigation. You react to the different evidence as it's uncovered immediately, whereas you're more proactive with the cold cases. You have to actively go out or actively research reports and evidence, and you're looking for leads to follow up on.
I wanted to ask Dan Baumann about something I've noticed somewhat myself when investigating unanswered questions or mysteries. Sometimes it's just hard to stop thinking about a case or a mystery or a story at the end of the day. Technically, Dan's role in investigating Billy's death is a part-time position. I wondered, is it really possible for him to tune out and turn off thoughts about Billy and the case when he's off work?
Well, this is all new to me, being a part-time employee. So, obviously you can't just set things down and put them away when you're not at the office. So I've got the case file downloaded to my computer at home and review and research when there's no ball games on.
I was curious about how Dan approached a case like this. Had he been to the river where Billy's body was found? Had he sifted through the evidence?
Well, you try to familiarize yourself as much as you can and with the evidence as it presents itself. You try to take a look at what has changed with the forensics over the years. And in this instance, it's considerable. The different things that can be done with potential evidence. You're an investigator. You want to go out and you want to see the location. You want to understand as much about things as you possibly can, and you want to personalize the victims. Both the deceased and the family members, and other friends, and so that you understand as much about that individual as you possibly can.
I explained to Dan that getting to know Billy was exactly what I had wanted to do, but I also found this to be very challenging. Not that Billy was an enigma or anything. I don't know that he was incredibly secretive or living a double life or anything like that. I believe I've just not found enough people who knew him well enough and were interested in speaking about it. Here is a tiny recap of what people have said about Billy in previous episodes.
I think he was a little bit introverted, socially introverted a bit, maybe a little.
As I remember, he worked. He was on the wrestling team for a time. He was in drama class.
And he was a tall kid, blonde hair, not a bad-looking guy. Just not really sociable, not really unlikable. Just so if you seen him at a party, he was just gonna give you a head nod, what's up, and that'll be about it. And
when we were together, we just kind of hung out, really. It wasn't no getting in trouble or anything that I'm aware of. So
Billy would sell dime bags out in the parking lot. That's like a little bit of marijuana, 4 or 5 joints worth. Super friendly, and I thought he was really cute. So he was tall and I think broad-shouldered. I think his eyes were like the Scandinavian green or blue. Hair blonde and feathered back. I think he had like the teardrop glasses if he wore them. He was always clean. He was just always friendly. You could hear him laugh across a room. If you were at the depot and you were looking for Billy, you would know where to find him by following that laugh.
I asked Dan what he had learned about Billy. Who was Billy Wolf?
Billy was a regular guy, an individual not different than most of us in that he was out there. He was, 21 years old or thereabouts, and he was making the same mistakes that a lot of us make. He was a friendly guy. People liked him. It's hard to find negative stuff other than, he drank a little too much. He maybe used some controlled substances and maybe hung out with some of the wrong people.
Are you able to tell us if you know if he used any other drugs besides marijuana?
I think, like any other individual that age, he experimented with some other drugs.
One of the mysteries or unanswered questions I've had about Billy Wolf has been, how much was he involved in the drug trade? We've heard that he sold dime bags, small amounts of marijuana. But elsewhere I've read that maybe Billy was not quite as low level as investigators originally thought. I asked Dan if he could give us any insight.
We don't know that he was, from the looks of things, from what I know about who he was, he certainly wasn't a high-level drug dealer.
Obviously, all cases are unique. Is there anything about Billy's case that you consider to be different or unique?
There's a lot of things that you don't see in many of the investigations, primarily the violence, or at least he was cut in half. And I haven't seen much of that over the years.
Speaking of the gruesome manner Billy's body was treated, being cut in half, I learned something early on while researching Billy's murder. Over the decades, there's been a story floating around about how he was cut in half. The story, or it might be more of a urban legend at this point, is that Billy's body might have been frozen first and then cut in a meat processing plant or other location with access to industrial saws. In fact, since starting chasing Billy, I've received at least 2 emails that paint this picture. Billy was taken to a meat processing plant and a saw was used to cut him in half. This story most likely originated from a statement that Sheriff Larry Costello made back in the day. In an article in the Forum of Fargo-Moorhead, Sheriff Costello was quoted as saying, "It had to be done with some type of bandsaw or something that made one swath when it went through." Certainly these stories about the meat processing plant grew out of this quote from this news article. However, some sources have been refuting Larry Costello's description of how the body was severed. For example, in a book titled Prairie Murders, a book about 3 Fargo area homicides, including Billy's murder, the author, Robert Dodge, states that law enforcement officer he spoke with said more or less the opposite, that the cut was not a clean cut at all, but something likely performed with a knife. I asked Dan Baumann if he could set the story straight for us.
Well, the evidence does not indicate that he was cut with like an electric saw of any type.
I've never seen the police file for Billy Wolf's case. So far, nobody's been willing to let me take a peek at it. But one thing that's been on my mind is, were any mistakes made in the investigation, or was there anything that could have been done differently? Which is a silly question in a way, because of course things could have been done differently. We can say that about just about anything in our lives. We're human, we make mistakes, and hopefully we learn from them. I wanted to ask Dan Baumann what he thought could have been done differently back in the day. To put things in perspective, though, we need to remember that in 1978, law enforcement agencies, and society in general, operated in a fashion much different than today. I mean, this was before personal computers were readily available, before the internet, before cell phones, before digital cameras.
Well, yeah, and the last thing I want to be is disrespectful to any of the investigators that were involved in the investigation. They did an incredible job, especially with everything that was going on at that time frame.
In hindsight, though, Dan acknowledged that there was something that was just very difficult to deal with back in 1978. Remember, Billy's body was found floating in the Red River, literally the state line between North Dakota and Minnesota. For that reason, several law enforcement agencies in both states were involved at the state, county, and city level. Even the FBI got in on it, he said. And back then, the best methods and processes for coordinating such an investigation across so many agencies were yet to be implemented or maybe even invented yet.
You know, dealing with multiple agencies and the information that's coming in and the volume of information that's coming in is that you need to have somebody scrutinizing that information as it's coming in and directing the investigation, and maybe not being as hands-on as they would like to be, but being more a director of the investigation. And I think that was an issue with this, that nobody was scrutinizing the reports as they were coming in.
In other words, if we could turn back time to 1978, which we can't, what we'd want to do is apply modern processes to dealing with many investigative agencies, all collaborating on one case. I asked Dan Baumann how his current investigation is coming along. Did he get any tips or phone calls yet?
Well, we haven't received any calls. I've spent most of my time reviewing the reports and scrutinizing the information that we have.
In fact, this is not the first time Dan Baumann has looked at the Billy Wolf case.
As a bureau agent, I did assist Clay County for a period of time in 2003, 2005 with looking at the investigation. So I was familiar with it, but it's been 15 years since I've spent a lot of time reviewing information. I reached out to the family and met with Michael.
Just for our listeners, can you explain who Michael is?
Michael is the younger brother of Billy Wolf.
Wow, so you've met with him.
Just to advise them of my participation in the investigation, and they advised that they had been following your podcast.
And maybe that's something you've noticed, that I've not interviewed any of Billy's family. I have reached out to some of them, and I even spoke with one of Billy's siblings on the phone, but so far they've not agreed to an interview. Dan Baumann had this very important insight into perhaps why Billy's family feels this way.
There's a reluctance of them to participate in the investigation with law enforcement, specifically because they were kind of victimized early on in the investigation. William Sr. was indicted, and it was a difficult time for the entire family. And they remember that, and they were treated not as witnesses at times. They were suspects, and rightfully so, with the information that they had at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine that was very, I mean, they not only lost Billy, but then they were immediately, as you say, suspects, which was a question I had for you. Is Billy Wolf's father, William Wolf Sr., in any way on your list of suspects today?
Nobody from back then can be completely excluded. Will I spend a lot of time focusing on Senior? Absolutely not.
I mentioned earlier about a book titled Prairie Murders by an author named Robert Dodge. The book is about 3 murders in the Fargo area. The bulk of the book is about the murders of Polly Johnson and Dixie Olson, who were both killed several months before Billy died. There is some interesting information about Billy's case in the book, but also some misprints and incorrect dates. I've spoken with the author, and he even apologized for some of the mistakes he's aware of, and stated that his publisher sent it to print prematurely. But, he says, he feels the main points are accurate. I asked Dan Baumann about the book. Okay, speaking of that book, I'm going to also ask you about this. There's a chapter in that book, What Happened to Billy, and there's a story about an informant in San Jose, California. He's arrested for something, and then he comes forward with information that he knows about Billy's murder, and I believe Larry Costello, the sheriff at the time, and another individual flew out there, according to the book, and lie detector tests were apparently taken and everything. In the book, it's described as quite possibly what did happen. Are you able to comment on that at all?
Well, it's definitely something that we'll follow up on.
I asked Dan Baumann what he felt is needed for Billy's case to be solved. We talked about advancements in forensic science. And my listeners would strangle me if I didn't ask this question. Do you have any DNA from that case?
Yeah, we really can't get into discussion about what evidence we have and don't have, and again, with the technologies changing, what they can do right now, or what they can't do right now, they may be able to do in the future.
Because this crime took place over 4 decades ago, I'm guessing they do not have any DNA, but I'm certainly hoping they do. I'm not sure where they would have gathered DNA. I don't believe there's a murder weapon such as a knife. The only place I can think of they might have gathered the DNA of a perpetrator would have been from the plastic bags that Billy's body was in, and those were floating in the Red River for a few days, way back in 1978. Earlier I've learned, or at least I've been told, that it is strongly believed that there are people alive today who have the information the police need to solve Billy's case.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Is we need cooperation from potential witnesses to come forward to us. Times have changed. The people that were involved aren't children anymore. They're probably don't have the same fears that they did at the time, and there's people out there that their consciences are haunting them, and we need them to come forward and cooperate with us, and help us understand the investigation, help us understand the leads that we have, and create new leads.
Feels right. guess you know I'm giving you a warning, 'cause me and Moon are itching to play. I'll take you on a trip beside the ocean and drop the top of Chesapeake